Hey y'all, it's Steph, and I'm just doing a video by myself today. And the video that I'm going to be doing is on the autism signs and symptoms that I saw in my children. People ask me this all the time, like what were the first signs and symptoms? And I want to just start with today's video with what I saw in them. And then later on, I'll do the progression of how it happened and everything. I'll tell you the whole story. They're doing great now, though. They're 14. They're twin boys. And they're doing great. They're doing awesome. Okay, so the first things I saw were disconnection to others. Like whenever I would pick up Matt, whenever he was very small, he was a very small baby, he would not like it. He would stretch out and kind of, he didn't like to be held. And so there was a disconnect to others, everybody but his twin brother, Sam. He was so close to him. Oh, I didn't write this one down, but I think it's kind of important. They both did like this for a long time, like they would play music over and over and over again, but their hands were doing like this. So there was the repetitive behavior. And they had these musical toys where they would push the music over and over and over again and do this for hours. I don't mean for a few minutes, I mean for hours. They would line things up. It started out with trains. Trains, that's what we would call them. Like they would, whenever they first could just play with toys, they would line them up. If you gave them anything to play with, that's what they would do. Blocks, whatever, they would line them up. But it came to a point, there was one point where they were putting books and chairs and everything else in a line through the house, like from one wall to the other. They would do it with cars. They came up with these elaborate patterns of cars. It got to where it was really awesome. But that's what they would do. They would call them trains. They would never play with these things. You couldn't touch them. If you touched them, somebody was gonna have a meltdown. And it was really kind of cool. Their minds are so different than ours, but there was a lot of organization, a lot of thought going into this. Sometimes they would go by color. Sometimes it would go by size, and sometimes you would look at it and you would think there was no pattern. I know they had a pattern in their mind, but then they would come up with these elaborate patterns, like actual patterns to where it was a design. And that was really cool. And they did not make eye contact. And this is really important for people not to push this on your child if they're not making eye contact. They are listening. I swear to you, there are times now whenever I'm homeschooling and Matthew will not look at me, and I'll ask him later on if he retained the information. I'll ask him a question and he'll tell me he does. They don't have to look you in the eye all the time. It's hard for them. They can't do both of those things at one time. I don't know exactly why. And not talking, they didn't talk for a long time. They were completely nonverbal for years, and that was hard. But we dealt with it. Now they talk just fine. Meltdowns. A lot of people say their kids are having meltdowns, and they're not. They're having temper tantrums. You have a spoiled brat. Sorry. I was kidding about that. Not all the time. I mean, sometimes children are tired or whatever. But a meltdown is not a temper tantrum. They're not the same at all. A temper tantrum is something that a child does to get something. Say you're at a store or something, this child wants a piece of candy. They're going to scream if you don't give it to them, and then this is a temper tantrum. They're going to scream, and then they're going to make sure you're looking, and if you're not looking, then eventually they'll stop. A meltdown it doesn't matter if you're looking. It doesn't matter if you're trying to console the child or whatever. There's no help for this. This is where their brain breaks down and melts down, and they can't process anything anymore. And they're screaming. Sometimes they're hitting. Sometimes, a meltdown can get violent with a child or an adult. But it has nothing to do with wanting a piece of candy or a toy or there is no outcome that they want other than whatever situation that they're in, their sensory issue. Almost all behavioral issues in people with autism are sensory related. I learned that, and it was really hard for me to learn. But it's very true. Okay, so sensory issues. Oh, we had so many. Matthew would take off his clothes, and he was so young. I don't want to embarrass him, but he was so young. I mean, he was so little. He would take off his shoes and he would throw them down the aisle in the grocery store or wherever. They would always do this. Always. If there was too much noise, there were a lot of sensory issues going on. Flapping. Flapping is where they do like this. This is stimming It's what they do. We do stimming too. We self-stimulate, like shaking our pencil, tapping our pencil, chewing on things. That's all. But they take it to a next degree, and they'll flap and they'll rock and do things like that. But he used to have bruises on his face and on his shoulders, and I didn't know what it was coming from. He was flapping so hard sometimes he would bruise himself. The lack of empathy, and I use Matt as an example in a lot of these because he did more of this stuff. Sam didn't talk a lot. He was very disconnected, but it was different. They're so different. Everybody on the spectrum is different. A lack of empathy. I always use this situation. Elizabeth is my youngest. He was hitting her, and I remember I was telling him, don't hit her, it hurts. And this is whenever I realized that he didn't understand that, because he told me, he said, no, and he was shaking his head, no, because it didn't hurt him. So he didn't really see her as separate from him. So whenever he hit her and she cried, he didn't understand it. He did not get that. Okay, toe walking. They don't walk sometimes. My kids walked with their feet flat, but sometimes they walk on their toes, and it's another sensory issue. Repeating words and sounds. I had a friend named Monique. Whenever Matthew learned that word, Monique, I could not say her name. I would have to call her Nikki. But there was that was like one thing. He would say it over and over and over again. But then they learned how to make certain sounds, like dead on, the sound of a police siren. I would think there was, I would always have to check. And then a blinker. I'd always have to check to see if my blinker was on, because Matthew and Sam both had that sound down. I would be in the back seat. Exact timing and everything sounded just like it. They just repeated, and it was like almost like these sounds got stuck in their head like a record. It was really kind of cool, The mind of people with autism is pretty brilliant. They do amazing things that I mean, the things that they do, they're so creative, and so they're amazing. They're amazing people. My boys are amazing people. I think all of the autism community is just composed of just amazing, remarkable, unique people. And these are just some signs and symptoms to look out for if you're thinking that maybe your small child might have autism. And that's all I have for you today. But anyway, much love to you guys. Keep on smiling, and we'll talk about autism again soon. Bye-bye, y'all.